Okay, I call the Human Resources Committee meeting to order.
All right, I'll do a roll call. Carol Young,
Here.
Scott McClory,
Here.
Tim Sharota.
Here.
We're going to discuss and make a possible decision regarding step structure implementation. And we're going to do a review of the job titles.
Ready, Adam?
Ready. So thanks for that nice segue. First off, thank you, Alderman, for coming in today, this afternoon, to have this HR meeting. It's kind of a lot to talk about on a lot of different things, some of which are step structure related, and then obviously later on in the agenda, some other topics we've been wanting to talk to you about. So appreciate you coming. Good news is, as I kind of mentioned during the council meeting on Monday, we're pretty well prepared to roll out the step structure for in January, in terms of finalizing that and getting the letters ready to notify the employees, and also in preparation for meeting with employees. There's a few job titles that we just want to double check with you that you're agreeable to. Basically, there's some employees who have job titles that don't necessarily relate to positions that were on the city's prior wage schedule, so they didn't, or uh, so just want to make sure that when we're putting them on the step structure, that you're agreeable that they will have the job title that actually matches the step structure. So, and I'll explain what I mean in just a minute here. So, and I will pull it up, but. And then we just got, there's one or two recommendations for changing titles from what was previously on the city's wage schedule to on the new step structure. So, for example, um, I guess one of our first recommendations, or I don't want to say recommendation, but I guess requests or issues, if you will, would be Terry Duggan, who's our receptionist. That was the title she was hired at and has been serving at for some time. I guess we're asking to have that new title be customer account clerk utilities on the step structure, which um, it's because she's basically doing the duties of the customer account clerk. She's been picking up, becoming more involved and more, handling more responsibility. Under the prior city's wage schedule and salary schedule, the receptionist and customer account clerk actually were at the same pay grade. So it was really, one had more responsibility, but they were the same pay grade, which seemed odd. But under the new step structure, the receptionist is going to go down one pay grade, and the customer account clerk will be, obviously one higher. So because again, Terry is performing the duties of the customer account clerk, the recommendation is to, or the ask is to have her title changed to customer account clerk for utilities, which is the same title as Rebecca Perez, who sits right next to her, and they work together. So
I just want to make a comment, I guess. We tasked the staff with reviewing them all, coming up with any recommendations, making the changes like from receptionist to customer account clerk utilities. Maybe I'm missing something. I don't need you to go through this entire list and give us your rationale about why you want to change them. I mean, if this is what you guys came up with, I'm fine with that. So just,
I mean,
I just want to be respectful of your time, because I think you're going to spend 20 minutes explaining why these people changed and blah, 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 and we're all going to go aye. So does anyone, I mean, do you really want to go through them line by line and job title by job title? I don't see the need to do that. I mean, that we trust that you guys did what we asked you to do.
I kind of agree with you, unless you see something here
Right.
that's a potential problem or have a cause for an unhappy employee.
well,
or
and
something.
just so you know, we're not going to have to go through all of them. There's only, looks like,
Oh, okay.
it's not the full list of every employee. It's only a select few that, for reasons I'll explain in a minute why.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
Um,
I was like, why are we going to do all,
So
okay.
you got about 8 that you wanted to.
Yeah, I just
Okay.
wanted to address one because there's technically well, first off, there may be a couple changes that, yes, may be more perfunctory that maybe you don't care about, but given the fact that this is certainly my first interaction with dealing with, trying to get a sense as to kind of what the HR committee wants to review and what you don't want to review, I'd rather be more transparent than less transparent. So, but anyway, that was one recommendation. just for the next one is Sherry McKinney, recommending that right now she's got an admin assistant slash secretary title. It's a little unclear. Because again, looking at the city's prior wage schedule and job titles, we're recommending admin assistant 1 for DPW and zoning. That's not, a huge issue. One, I wanted to mention, we've been Matt Lindstrom right now. That position is the DPW operations manager. We're asking to have that changed to director of public works, and that's what it was listed on the step structure, be director of public works. Why does that matter? Well, because typically an operations manager is usually somebody who reports to a public works director. They're usually kind of more of a mid-management position. And so if you look at the current job description for the operations manager for the city, says it's a department director position or department head. So it seems odd, sort of a little odd that he's not actually listed as a director. And if you look at, like Delavan and McQuantigo, I mean, so they have public works directors. So that's something I wanted to make sure there weren't any objections to. I guess I'll skip Rachel because that's pretty straightforward. She was hired as under the city's prior step structure, or I should say, under the city's prior wage schedule. We only had one admin assistant position on the list, and it was an admin assistant / park and rec, and it was a pay grade 6, which under the new structure that would equal the admin assistant 2 for park and rec. So nothing's happening in terms of pay grade for her. It's just a slight job title change. A couple things just with respect to the water department. These shouldn't be too, I guess somewhat straightforward, somewhat not. Last August, when the council, you guys approved changing the job titles and the pay for the water operators and creating a little bit more steps, if you will, or water operator 1, 2, and 3 rather than the utility tech 1 and 2. Just wanted to kind of let you know how that's going to impact these individuals, but also just to, so Michael Dean, he has 3 out of the 4 DNR certifications, so he'd fall as a water operator 2, because in order to be a water operator 3, which is the top water operator, you have to have all 4 certifications and years of experience. So for the next one, Bryant Minell, he just got his 4th certification in May, so you have to have at least 2 years of experience as a water operator 2 in order to be a water operator 3, so he'd be eligible in 2024 in May. And then this next one is one that is probably the trickiest one and something I really would like some feedback on, or I guess, is so Shane Kurth, who's one of our experienced water operators, was back under John Murphy, was offered a position of foreman for the water department. Problem is the city didn't really have a foreman position to give at the time. It was a little unclear. The city at one point had a job description / title, if you look at the schedule, but it wasn't really clear. If you looked at the job description, it said at the top water operator / foreman, but if you read the actual description of the duties, it didn't talk about supervising anybody. It didn't look like it was an actual like supervisory foreman position. It was almost like, I don't know, I can't understand exactly what was the attempt at the time, but needless to say, nothing was ever brought to council. You guys never approved any creating a foreman position or hiring him as that position. When John offered that, he gave him a significant pay increase under the guise of being a merit increase, even though at the time Shane turned down the foreman position. He got the big pay increase anyway. So then after Tim starts, he then apparently reoffers that position to Shane, and at some point Shane accepts it. Again, nothing was brought to the council. We have no documentation that anything was approved. So, right now you got Shane who thinks he's the foreman. We don't have a foreman position on the step structure. I just don't know what you guys want to do. I would propose putting him at water operator 3, which is, not going to impact him pay-wise because he's got, plenty, like 5 or 6 steps left to go. He'd be on step 10 of the pay grade for water operator 3. But I don't know what you guys want to do about that in terms of if somebody's been offered a position that you guys didn't approve and it's not clear we really have. I don't know how you want to handle that. So,
On the org chart, is he listed as a supervisor in the org chart tree? Like
There
he's
is
here?
none.
Huh?
There is none.
There's no org chart at all for the water department?
No.
Yeah, I mean, right now, as far as, all I can say is if you look at the job titles that were listed on the salaries, schedule that the cities had, you just had water superintendent, you had the operator in chief, and then you had a couple of water operator positions were listed on there. And again, there was at one point, there was some sort of water operator slash foreman position that the city had, but my understanding from what I was told is that was something that was intended to serve as a precursor to the water superintendent position that Tim took. It was kind of like something they were going to do rather than having a water superintendent. So they tried creating that position. And when you still had John Murphy, who was technically at that point supervising both water and electric. So then it was presumably once that position was eliminated, and then the city hired a water superintendent instead. That's why I don't think that foreman position really was really intended to remain. I mean, I don't know. So, um, anyway,
Well, he's already getting paid $31 an hour, and it's been like that since August of 2021. So I guess the reclass to make him water operator 3 is fine. I don't think it would be in our best interest to go back and tell him, oh, by the way, what you had as a raise from a year ago, we're taking back from you. You're back to $25 an hour. I don't see that as being an option for us unless you guys disagree.
Does a water operator 3 supervise the water operator 2s? I mean, does he still act like a foreman per se?
Even if he's just an IC on site,
yeah, and if you look at the description for the water operator 3, it does say, let me double check real quick. It does say that they may occasionally serve as the operator in charge in the absence of the water superintendent and operator in charge.
I'm willing to leave it the way you have it proposed, Adam, but I'm only willing to do that contingent upon the fact that by the first of the year, we see an actual org chart and it shows that he supervises people. It has him, it goes, Matt down to Tim, and when Tim needs to go to someone, he goes to this guy, and this guy needs a delegated, he goes to the 2s and the 1s like Tim was saying. Because otherwise, I mean, he's getting paid supervisory's wages, but he doesn't supervise anyone, they're all equal. Well, that doesn't work. And even if it's not an org chart right now, if Tim can articulate or Matt can articulate, he's the boss. Even if it's just the day-to-day operations, he's still the one that the superintendent goes to as the trickle-down theory goes, then that's fine. But if he's basically an equal to the guys that are operator 2s and 1s, then he's not a foreman and he's not a supervisor and he shouldn't be paid that way. Even if it's just, informal.
I mean, I would say certainly informally, I could say Shane does provide guidance to the department. I mean, he's got a lot of experience. He's definitely provides guidance to the department in terms of informal leadership. I'm saying the city never had a formal title, foreman position that was approved for him. And so
Flesh out his job description a little bit that would indicate that in the absence of Tim, he would be the go-to guy for the water department?
Beef it up a little bit.
Yeah.
well, and
just-
it does say that. It says in the job description that
Okay.
in the absence of the water operator or the operator in charge, he may, I'll reread it a second. That they may, basically says they may occasionally serve as the operator in charge in the absence of the water superintendent and operator in charge. So, and the only other thing too is, as I mentioned, I mean, he would be on step 10 of that pay grade, and there's 16 steps. So even though he did get that big increase back in 21, let's say it didn't put him out of the range for the position. So, I mean, not like he's technically getting overpaid for that position, but he was given an increase, presumably because he was going to be serving the foreman, even though, like I said, if you look at the documentation, which I have, it just describes it as a merit increase. So there's no documentation to say that that increase was because he was going to serve as the foreman. In fact, he reportedly turned it down. So,
Like I said, even if it's on a scribble pad, on a yellow piece of paper, we need to have an org chart for that department. It would take literally, I mean, it would literally take 5 minutes to draw boxes and draw the little arrow, draw the lines going down, and that would help support this increase. The sheriff doesn't call a patrolman and say, I need to talk to you. The sheriff calls the captain calls the lieutenant, who calls the sergeant, who calls the patrolman. They should have the same thing in every department, every agency. I mean, you don't go to firefighter one, right? So, even if it's temporary, and like I said, it's just on a yellow legal pad, just something so everyone knows.
Yeah, we can do that. I just wanted I wanted the council to be aware that, technically, the title that's been approved by the city hasn't ever approved a foreman position for this individual.
It doesn't have to say foreman.
And that's what I'm just trying to
It
say.
can say water operator 3.
Yeah.
As long as the people beneath that box are operator 2s and operator 1s. I don't care what the semantics is there. For the vernacular, I don't really have an issue with.
At some point, isn't a few other guys or other operators gonna be up to a 3, so it's not like there's only 1 3. Once they get their licenses and been here long enough, there's gonna be more than 1 3, so it's not like if he's supposed to be a supervisor or above anybody else, he's not going to be once others come to a 3, so I guess
Are
some
they
of the.
gonna, when they become operator 3s, are they gonna go from 25, 31 to 31?
They'll just go up to whatever.
Right.
No, they would get presumably it's a 6% increase generally.
Well, I don't need to get too deep in the weeds. They can call him whatever works. The on-site OIC operators in charge, or the manager, or the supervisor, the foreman, something that's clear delineation that he supervises them and is accountable to them when things get delegated to him, or he delegates them down to water operator 1s and 2s.
Now, like, the people that are going to be 3s, are they aware of how much he makes? I mean, if
Public information.
it is,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
I mean, if they ask, we gotta tell them, it's not a secret.
Right,
But you said they're not gonna jump from 25 to 31, they're gonna go, now with the steps we're gonna propose, they're gonna go from 25 to 25.50 to 26 to blah, blah, blah. So they're not gonna do a $5 jump.
right.
The $5 jump assumes, to me, that he is some kind of a supervisor, some kind of a foreman, or even an officer in charge, an IC. Like at the sheriff's office, we didn't have 2 sergeants in that day. It was built into the system that somebody would be the temporary 8-hour IC of record. Someone had to be a supervisor.
So then are you looking for the creation of a foreman position? Because within the next 2 years, we're going to have at least one other water operator up at an operator 3 position?
I think we don't have a choice. I mean, if there's 4 people that are operator 3s, who's in charge? You can't tell me what to do. I'm a 3 just like you. Well, you can't tell me what to do. I'm a 3 just like you. Well, that
So
doesn't
you
work.
almost need a different title for that one.
Well, I think part of the problem is you already have a supervisor. You already have 2 supervisors in that department because you've
They're
got.
there every day.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the water superintendent, and then you also have the water operator in charge, so I mean, you already have like two levels of supervision.
Current water operator in charge?
No, that's Chris Robers is the operator in charge.
He's a water operator 3?
No, he's an operator in chief. He's an
Okay,
operator,
so
sorry,
he's
in
got a
charge.
specific title.
Yeah, he has an
Okay.
operator in charge, yeah.
So maybe we don't need to.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now I get it. I thought there was nothing between superintendent and Shane. Okay, now I'm good. All right. Anyway, I don't see us going backwards. So I don't know if you need a formal motion or consensus or what, but I don't see us going back and telling this guy, hey, I know we gave you a $5 raise a year ago, we're taking it back. That's not happening.
Yeah, and just so for clarity, wasn't proposing that we do that. I just wanted you to be aware of that the offer had been made and it was not run through council, and that for purposes of our step structure, we don't have a foreman position. I just want you to be aware of that in
That's
case
fine.
there's questions or concerns, so. And then the last 2, I guess I won't go into too much detail because they're not real controversial, but Jody Langer, she was hired as a receptionist for the city. She was moved over to the Public Utilities Department. She was given the title that they offered her was admin assistant, but they told her it was a lateral move. She wasn't going to be giving a pay increase, and that her anniversary date would stay the same. So regardless, I mean, it doesn't really have a significant impact other than to say, under the step structure, she'd be an admin assistant 1 for utilities. And then Andrea Ransom, who's the secretary/EMS account manager, under the city's prior structure or pay schedule, that was a pay grade 6 position, which was, definitely higher up. And she is EMT certified and responds to calls. So the proposal would be to have her be an admin assistant 2 for fire. And I talked to the chief, and if we were if she were to leave and we were to hire somebody new who comes in and doesn't have an EMT, isn't responding to calls, we'd probably hire them at an admin assistant 1 level. But
question, but looking at this chart, you've got administrative assistants 1s and 2s, and I was kind of wondering what the difference was. So if you were it looks like a pay grade 6 went to a 2.
yes, yeah, yep.
And so what was the first one, up on the top? Was it assistant 1? So so what pay grade was that position prior to this step structure? What was Sherry's pay grade?
Problem is there was no, there was a salary schedule that didn't, there was only one admin assistant position on the salary schedule total, and it said admin assistant dash park and rec. So I don't know what position, I don't know what admin assistant position was given to some of these employees, or what they thought that the position was, because there's nothing, there's just no admin assistant position there. There was a multitude of secretary positions on that chart. Or I mean, I should say under the old wage schedule, there was a list of different secretary positions. I just don't know what the intent was.
I just didn't know what the difference was, and, like Park and Rec has a administrative assistants 2, but zoning has a 1. I don't know what the
Yeah,
job description differences are.
Yeah, and like I said, part of the issue was the only admin assistant position we ever had was an admin assistant dash park and rec. And so that was at a higher pay grade 6. And so my intent with this was to not be making any changes more than necessary. So it was like I was trying to keep people kind of in the same pay grades that they were at. The one exception being, like in the case of Rachel, why is she an admin assistant 2, or why is that position, let's say, a higher than, let's just say, a 1? I talked a lot with Carl, and that position requires it has a supervisory element. They deal with supervising the cash handling of the lifeguards at the pool. They teach them how to like balance the money. They deal with the petty cash. So that's just one example. She does all their publication, graphics work, internet posts, etc. So I mean, it definitely has more of a supervisory.
Yeah, I guess that's
involves a
good.
lot.
That's a good explanation for me and well thought out. So I've got no issues.
So I guess my question for the committee is, I don't know how you recommend we handle this in terms of, do you want this to be put in a resolution? Do you want the full council to approve it? What do you want us to do?
Can I ask what have we done in the past?
I don't know, Lacey. That's part of the problem.
99% of everything we do, if it's approved by the committee, goes to full council for super approval, if you will. There's nothing that we would do on our end and it would suddenly just show up as a housekeeping item, like, oh, by the way, Adam got a $6 raise, HR already approved it, and the council would be like, what? What do you mean? No, that's not how it works. I don't know that needs to be a formal resolution. I think it just needs to be in front of the full council like any other thing that comes out of committee, unless you guys disagree.
Are you talking about just these changes or the entire step structure?
No, it's just these, because they've approved the step structure as a whole. It was just, this just has to do with more the implementation of it and acknowledging that these job titles are going to require some tweaks from what the person's current title is or what they think their title is. Um,
I think we pass it out of committee and then on to the council. But
Yeah,
I
and
don't think we need
I wouldn't
resolution.
generally speak, I understand what you're saying, Alderman McClory, in terms of, yes, I understand normally your recommendations then get approved by the full council. I just meant more from your opening statement about how you didn't necessarily think that this needed to be looked at to start with, whether you still want to forward it or not, so that's,
I think add it to the agenda and add it as a supplement to the packet and see if anyone has any questions who wasn't at the committee meeting, like we do with some other stuff. Yeah.
Yes, I make a motion, we approve these changes
okay.
as is.
Thank you.
Department wages?
Yes. So in preparing for our rollout of the step structure and just doing more research on it, um, it it's become clear that, or I don't want to say it's become clear, but it, it may be advantageous to kind of remove the electric department employees, specifically the superintendent, the lead journeyman, and the journeyman from the step structure for the reasons I'm going to explain in a minute. First and foremost, the apprentice position, there's a contract with the Department of Workforce Development, and this is what all utilities do, but anybody who's an apprentice, their pay rate is tied to a base rate of the journeyman. They call it the journeyman base rate. And they get, for every 6 months that they do the program, they get, their percentage goes from 60 to 65, 70, 75, like that, up to 100%. So for one challenge of having the step structure is technically the base pay rate, if you have a range for the position of a journeyman, the base rate might be 32 or $33, let's say, for the base rate. Well, they're getting, let's say 70% of that $30. They're now in the 23 to 24 range. Well, in talking to other cities, you're talking to a lot of cities and utility departments, almost every city out there just has one flat rate for their journeyman. And so it's kind of surprising that, okay, that there's just one rate regardless of experience, but that kind of seems to be what people are doing. And so then they're pegging that apprentice rate to their just standard flat rate. So if that flat rate is basically, $42, $43, $44, let's say, 70% of 43, we're going to be way under the market in terms of, going to be way under the market for hiring an apprentice, because that percentage is going to be based off a low end of $32 as opposed to the high end of, let's say, $42, $43. So that's one practical problem of having a step structure for the apprentice position, just because it's based on a percentage, which then that segues into the, as I just mentioned, really the industry standard generally seems to be that they just have most utilities just have a flat rate for their electric department journeymen. Again, I can't explain the theory other than a lot of people that I've talked to said it's a vestige back when, we still had the union contracts and there was just kind of a flat rate, what was negotiated, and that's kind of what has stuck around. So having a step structure for that journeyman position might not be practical, because if we hire somebody new, the market's going to dictate that they're getting paid, it'd be very hard to hire somebody at a step 1, 2, or 3 on the step structure, just because the standard rate they're going to get everywhere else is going to be basically almost the max, really. And then what was also, problematic is that, we had talked about, well, they should fall technically, if you look at the MEUW data, they should fall in the range of pay grade 14, let's say. But we talked about how, because some of ours are so high right now, you can't even get them on the structure without actually putting them basically, or paying them at a step 15 or pay grade 15 rate, which we had talked about. Well, if you put them at least, or pay them at pay grade 15 to just get them on the structure, they could get a couple of steps, at least in the short term. Problem with that was we had talked about, well, to get everybody on the structure and give everybody at least a 2.5% increase for next year, everybody's going to go on a step that's at least 0.5% above their current rate. as of January 1 to get them on the structure. And that if they're not, then you'd give them an extra step just to get above that 0.5%. And I'm not kidding you when I say the lineman came in at 0.5% of that. The closest step would be 0.5%. So now we're under what the goal was. So you'd have to give them an extra step to get them on the structure, which now they're basically falling off the structure again. So for all these reasons, it's going to be a lot, I don't want to say simpler, but for the city's competitiveness and the practical operation of this, it probably makes sense to take them off the structure, kind of proceed as the city's been doing, which is using the MEUW data as a guide and giving them, more of just a generic, annual percentage increase as we look at that MEUW data. And I can go into the data in a second as to what some options would be for that, but I don't know if you have questions about. And I would just add to say that in looking around, typically the superintendent, lead journeyman, and the journeyman are all kind of tied together. So we would, I guess I'd suggest taking them off, just keeping them together. But I don't know if you guys have any questions on that or.
To me, I guess, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Yeah, and it'd be nice for, having internal consistency and some sort of logic between all the departments and employees is ideal and part of the reason why we're trying to do this, but I kind of feel like this is trying to put a square peg in a round hole, so I just think it's gonna be tough to work. And so in terms of, I don't know, in terms of a percentage increase next year, if they're not gonna be on the step structure, I just wanted to give you a little bit of data as to where they're at and get guidance from you on what your recommendation would be for, let's say, a wage increase for the electric department. You'll see at the top here, these are the city wages right now for our superintendent, journeyman, or lead journeyman and journeyman. To the right, you'll see, so MEUW has data that they get from the members, and they published that earlier this year. And they have different categories based upon whether you're above 5,000, below 5,000 in terms of customers, what your revenues are, if it's above 15 million, below 15 million, below 10 million. So the city, we have about 5,100 utility customers, electric customers, and our revenues are 12 to 13 million this year. Anticipated to go up to closer to 15 million next year, in part because of the whole power cost adjustment. But we're right on the border of a lot of categories, which makes knowing exactly which number to use just a little bit challenging. So what I did was just averaged basically the two categories together. And if you do that, that's what this column gives you. So you can see what the average would be of other cities that are comparable. Now, this does take into account the value of the health insurance. And I know that's something that you guys have expressed an importance into doing when looking at our wages. And certainly the MEUW also does that for reasons I'll explain in a minute. That is something we've taken into account in the past when looking at what the wages should be for that department. Health insurance has been taken into account. So now there's two different health insurance numbers you can use. You can either use the 4,000 number that we had used when putting together step structure based upon some of the averages of surrounding areas, or you can use the $1.44, which is kind of the average of some of the other electric departments that we've surveyed. You can use either of those two numbers, but for that category or this column right here, I was using the 4,000 number, which equates to $2.15 an hour. So if you were to add 215 to the 4166, that would give you the average wage without taking into account health insurance or health premiums for MEUW for 2022. And then I don't know how familiar you guys are with All right, hopefully you can see that. I don't know how familiar you guys are with what they call Group C utilities. I don't know if there's been much discussion about that, but apparently MEUW has different groups of utilities based upon size, customers, revenues, et cetera. And apparently, and this is what I've been told by BZ, the superintendent, that the city has typically fallen among the Group C utilities. And I know these are some of the comparable cities that the city has apparently, looked at in years past as kind of a guide for what the wages should be. And so BZ gave me this data of our Group C cities for '23, and you can ignore that bottom one because that was from a Group B. But you'll see if you look at the average of 2023 wages for journeymen, that this is the data that BZ was able to obtain. The average of our other comparable cities is for '23 would be 43.32 an hour for the linemen, which if I'll pull up the spreadsheet I was just looking at, but so you'll see. You'll see that number reflected right there in column E, the 43.32, and that number does also take into account the value of the health insurance, so that's been taken out. So right now, our journeymen are at 42.49. The average for '23 among the Group C cities is 43.32. So that kind of gives you a rough idea of how we compare. If you wanted to rather than using the 4,000 health insurance estimate we talked about, if you wanted to use the number that the MEUW was using, then you can see that the MEUW average would be 42.37. So you can tell we're right now we're right in the range of kind of what other cities are at. We would want to go up to 43.32 next year if you wanted to stay average with the other comparable utilities. You'll see below a 2% increase over 2022 would give you the 43.34 number, 43.32 we just talked about. If you go up to 2.5%, it'd be 43.55, and 3% would be 43.76. Just for informational purposes, when we proposed the step structure, they would have gone on the step structure at 43. It says 43.35 if they had been on the step structure. I'm sorry, it should have been 43. They would have been at 43.53 if we had put them on the step structure, which to our credit was actually right in the range of where they should be. So, so I don't know if you want to take that into consideration. And lastly, one thing that relates to this too is in surveying the other utilities that are in this Group C, all the other utilities do their pay increases effective January 1 for all their electric people. They don't do it on the anniversary date. So I guess one change then would be for next year would be to have the electric department rates be increased all on January 1. Again, that's up to you, but that's a request coming from BZ. If we're going to continue to try and follow the MEUW data on the Group C utilities, to then, if they're all increasing January 1, to do the same for them. But I don't know if you guys have any questions about some of these rates or these.
The rest of the city employees?
As of January 1st, all the rest of the city employees are going to be getting at least 0.5%, depending on how they fall in the step structure, and then they'll get their merit increase on their anniversary date, which will be 2%. So all city employees would be getting at least 2.5% in '22.
But if their anniversary date is November 1st,
Right,
they're not reaping that 2% benefit
right.
till the end of the year. So, okay.
You're off again.
We're back.
Good Lord. You can't hear me? You got to be kidding.
I can, but the recording can't.
That's probably the best for everybody. So 43.32 is what we have already, we've already done the math, and that's what we can absorb within the budget, Corey?
Corey in the microphone.
43.
We
Was it 4355? Is that what you said it was?
Yeah, we budgeted 4353 because that's where they would have fallen on the step structure. The Group C average is 4332, so the 4353 we had initially planned on would be slightly above the average for the Group C cities and would actually work to be about as you can see, about a 3% increase.
Yes, my first inclination would be to just stick with the 2.5 that everybody else is getting, but I know we're under the eight, or behind the 8 ball with the electric department, just like we were with the fire department, where if we don't stay competitive, we're gonna have turnover, which is counterproductive, so I guess I think we should just go to 3% and.
I agree with Tim. If Corey says that we can uh, withstand that and it's within the budget parameters, let's go ahead and do the 4355. So that's my second to your motion. Aye.
Aye.
Send it to full council.
And would that be,
Part of my motion was to take them out of the step structure
Right, right,
and put them on their own.
right.
And give them a 3% raise effective January 1st for all employees.
And then we
Just to
could,
flesh out that
Okay.
motion.
I'll amend my second to reflect that. Aye.
thank you, Alderman Schroeder, for clarifying that, so I appreciate that. And I'll, I guess, turn it back over to Alderman Young.
Oh, okay. Now we will have discussion and possible decision regarding the use of MLB Medical Leave Bank for COVID.
And just, the good news is this part of the meeting should be a lot faster and less complicated. So that was the hard part. This is the easier part. One of the things that, and this is going to be kind of a tag team with Lacey here, but right now the city, in order to use your medical leave bank, it has to be a FMLA qualifying event. And so up till now, the city, when it comes to COVID, has been treating COVID as an FMLA qualifying event. We've been doing research and consulted with CIVMIC, and basically now the guidance is it's not de facto automatically a FMLA qualifying event. COVID is only treated as such if you're actually receiving medical treatment, and it's not just because you're doing the following the CDC recommendations. So with that being said, it kind of creates a problem because it's like, well, in order for the employees to be able to use your medical leave bank, it has to be FMLA, but it really isn't automatically FMLA. So we're kind of asking you whether you would want to amend the policy to allow the medical leave bank to be used for either, COVID specifically, or whether it's something more like, to be used for, I don't know, adhering to, recommended quarantine procedures or something. We're trying to figure out a way to avoid putting our employees in a situation where if they follow the CDC guidelines, which we're recommending right now, or, which is, 5-day quarantine, they'd have to be using 5 days of PTO or going unpaid. So, or we have to then go through the whole FMLA process where Lacey's already got, and we got like, what, 5 or 6, I think, for around Thanksgiving in terms of,
We had 6 in the last 2 weeks, and I checked the file, and we've had over 26 FMLA qualifying events that have been processed for 2022, which is double what we had last year.
but the 6, let's just say within the last couple of weeks, were all COVID related. And so like, if we want to, we can continue doing that, but they really probably shouldn't be treated as FMLA, but to start with, so.
Right now, if you want to draw from your MLB, it absolutely has to be under the current policy, it absolutely has to be an FMLA qualifying event.
Yeah.
So if we peel that onion, take one layer back and say, if we change the policy, you can use your MLB for any type of illness. I could have the flu, I could have strep, I could have mono, I could have COVID, or are you saying, you guys collectively, that you only want to ratchet it back one click, that it's only for COVID? And otherwise, you'd take PTO for strep and PTO for a broken arm and whatever.
I believe I would like to be able to offer it because we're asking and or recommending people still quarantine for COVID rather than coming in with COVID and spreading it. I don't really want to get into the other topics of people coming to work with strep or the flu or a cold.
So that's so my
But
question,
because,
yeah,
yeah, just for COVID,
okay.
and we would ask for some sort, like we do now, of confirmation that they do have COVID, whether they actually went to a doctor or did an at-home test, but without having to go through all of the paperwork of FMLA, which takes it to a whole nother level.
So we're just taking the current policy for the MLB and adding COVID to it. Am I right on that?
Yes, and like it's an exception, I guess, or,
Okay.
yeah.
It would not have to be an FMLA qualifying event, but it would still need to be within the very strict parameters of COVID, not all the other stuff that I mentioned.
Correct.
And I'll just play devil's advocate. I call you up and I say, I can't come into work today. I tested positive. What currently do I need to prove to you as your coworker or whatever? And if you don't want to answer this, if it needs to go into closed session, if it qualifies or what, I don't, HIPAA and all that kind of stuff, but I assume we just go on the honor system right now?
Yes, we do. We
Oh,
ask
and that-
for
and
them
that's
to
fine.
submit something. We go on the honor system.
Okay.
And
But-
I don't want to get into the honor system
mean,
Okay.
part.
Okay.
Just
fair
to go
enough.
there, because a lot of my employees, that's why I'm here, is because most of my employees have been affected by this, plus they have a stronger risk of getting COVID.
Sure, yeah.
This position they do. So as we look at the CDC standards, to come back to work, they cannot use a home test. It has to be done from an outside thing, according to CDC. After 5 days, they retest.
Okay,
in
well, I
that
don't want
7-day
to, I don't want
period.
to open up a
It
big
can't be a
old,
home test,
yeah.
so I think somehow we have to eliminate, if we eliminate that home test, which is probably in our best interest if we're shelling out money for people to, if it's just on the honor system and say, okay, it's a home test, we need proof of that, but if it has to come back for them to come back to work by CDC, it's gotta be done by an outside at a certain, I can't remember the name of it right off the top of my head, but I can bring you the standard and show the standard.
Well,
I think it should
and it
match
might
the
be different-
standard.
it might be
so
different-
across the board, so it's not
Yeah.
just the fire department, following CDC and the rest of the city not following CDC. It should be a standard across
I
the
guess-
whole city.
I'm cautious. I don't want to overstep. The specific question was, can we alter our policy to allow COVID to be an exemption under the FMLA? That's the specific question that was raised.
Not under FMLA, but to allow people to use the time they've put in their medical leave bank.
Right,
For COVID.
for
Yeah.
COVID, right. So I guess I would make a motion to allow that exemption. And the discussion part, obviously, it doesn't need to be anchored to the policy how we go about the follow-up. Let's just leave that silent intentionally. And then internally, you guys do what you do as, the head of the fire department and with the staff that you have. And like you said, we'll just leave it, we'll let that, it's working, it's not broken, let's not try to fix it.
Yeah,
Will
and
that-
just for
will that- will
clarification
that
too, I
work?
think, and certainly the fire chief can correct me, but I think there's different guidelines based upon whether you're a healthcare professional as opposed to, in terms of like the CDC recommendation, they are more stringent for healthcare related professionals rather than just city. So I'm not aware of anything saying the city employees have to use a external testing device or anything, but. So in one just quick follow-up to your question too about, what happens about other things. We have had discussions, which will be probably a future conversation, but about what the city's going to do for just health in general in terms of what should we do to, on the one hand, protect the city in terms of ensuring that employees are showing up to work, et cetera, but at the same time, not encouraging employees to be showing up to work sick. So this will have to be a conversation for future, but we understand it as a bigger question.
Right now, if somebody has, their PTO bank is at 0 and they have something that's not COVID, they have the flu. They just stay home for like 3 days and don't get paid?
Yes.
Okay. That's what I thought. All right.
So I mean, just to be clear on what you're changing, the MLB or the PTO, are we only gonna allow them to use the MLB after they exhausted their PTO?
No.
To me, that should be, they should have to use their PTO first and then use the MLB. Because otherwise, they're gonna be able to get an extra benefit and extra days off, where, if you had normal sick leave, they'd be using sick days anyway, without using MLB. So the PTO is basically your sick days, so in my opinion, I think you're just giving them extra time off.
Well,
But it's
And I don't-
specific.
And I'm not saying that's wrong, right or wrong,
But
but
it's
that's the way
specific
I'm
for
reading it.
COVID.
Well, it's just for COVID because we are still trying to follow the CDC recommendation, which is to quarantine for 5 days. So if it were to happen for someone, say over a weekend, and they only had a quarantine for 3 of the 5 days because of the way it happened, but it's really, how do we continue to ask people to follow these guidelines if we're not trying to help them? And if they have to use all their PTO and then they have nothing left, then if they do need to be out in the future for a cold or the flu, they would have to use that PTO. Or maybe then they can't take off to go to an event that they were hoping to go to, something like that. We would like to try to work with the employees. They do have to have time in their medical leave bank in order to be able to use one. If they didn't save anything, then no, that wouldn't be an option. They would still be using PTO.
Right.
But we're just trying to think of different ways to help.
Yeah, I'm
so.
not disagreeing, I just wanna make sure there's this clarification there.
well, and certainly if we have an indication that, if an employee were abusing it, then obviously the city can require, medical documentation to ensure that they're actually, in fact, have COVID. So, I mean, there are ways to verify that. If for some reason someone's got COVID 5 times in a month or something like that, it might be a lot. So,
Okay.
So we had a motion and a second to allow the exemption.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, then next, anybody else have any questions? Okay. Discussion and possible decision regarding revisions to the HRA plan.
right. So this is just a quick outline of the issues or what we wanted to just talk about with our HRA. And basically, as you know, we're getting ready to use Associated Bank to do our HRA FSA administration, which we're looking forward to. In looking at that, our current HRA policy and procedures are pretty complicated, and I don't know how familiar you guys are with this, so I'm going to just give you a quick summary with some supplemental information from Lacey, who also works with this, or can explain it. But right now, the city's HRA procedures are really complicated. Basically, every year, an employee gets what they call a base contribution of either $250 if you're an individual individual, or $500 if you're on a family plan with the city. And then there's a second pot that you get that's a supplemental pot that, again, is $250 or $500, depending on whether you're individual or family. And the supplemental doesn't carry over for the next year. The base part does. But then the base part, 75% of it carries over, not the full amount. Okay, so you've got that as like a preliminary thing that makes things complicated. It gets even more complicated because the way the policy is drafted, if you actually want to use your money, there's like 3 separate buckets in an order that they have to go in. And so the first bucket is your current year contribution. The second bucket's the prior year rollover contribution. And then the third bucket is the supplemental amount that you got for the current year. How you're supposed to figure out as an employee what bucket your money, how much you have, where it's coming from, I don't really quite know. It's complicated. And certainly, as you can imagine, from an administrative perspective, trying to administer that's been really, really difficult. And I mean, yes, Associated Bank is going to be taking on that burden to a certain extent, but I know a lot of employees struggle to know how much they even have in their HRA because it's, how much carried over. You have the deduction, which pot is which. So we're asking for a few. Again, I wouldn't say asking, but suggesting some changes to the HRA just to simplify it so it's easier to not only administer, but easier for people to understand what they even have, for the employees to understand what they even have. And so one of those would be just to combine rather than having this base contribution and supplemental contribution, why don't you just have one annual contribution? You know, if whether it's, you know, the $500 total for an individual and 1,000 for a family, or if you want to do some variation thereof, but not have two different contribution amounts, or not have like a base and then the supplemental amount. And then, you know, sort of the other request would be to just allow your funds to carry over, you know, so you've got one pot of money, it carries over from one year to the next. There's not like a 25% reduction on what carries over. And then to basically, right now, there's a cap of $2,500 in terms of how much money can even be accumulated for you to use from year, you know, from prior years and current year. You know, $2,500 now is really honestly not a ton for medical expenses, so we're asking that that be increased to 4,000, which if you were to, let's say, do the combination where you just have one annual contribution for HRA, you know, and a family can get up to $1,000 per year, then 4,000 would basically be 4 years worth if they didn't spend any of their HRA money. So, and then the last part, it would just be to simplify the process in terms of how employees can actually access the money, which is you got a single pot of money that you get a year, and you have a single pot of money from which you know, can have medical eligible expenses paid for. You don't have sort of the three different, you know, this bucket, then that bucket, and then this other bucket over here, just to make it easier for people to understand.
What happens currently when somebody separates from the city and their HRA account has $3,200 in it? They get that paid out? They don't get any of that?
They can submit receipts up to a year after they've incurred the expense, but we wouldn't take any receipts from the day they're done,
Okay.
or,
I was just curious, you know, what's the benefit or lack thereof of, you know, not using it and allowing it to continue to accrue right up to the maximum? What's the benefit to the employee? Rainy day fund kind of thing?
Well, I think it really just comes down to, have you had a good year or a bad year?
Right,
Lacey's family's had a couple bad years.
right.
But there's no incentive to not use the money because you don't get paid out.
Right.
The one exception is under our current plan, employees who were hired prior to 2019 and retire do get, depending on how many years they've been with the city, they can get up to a percentage to be used for future expenses. But again, it's not a payout. It's just they can still use some of that money for HRA related purposes.
Does anybody know the backstory about why we currently have a base and a supplemental that are exactly the same?
There was an
Like-
update made in 2019. I don't know why, but I believe because they do consider us a high deductible, which makes me laugh every day. High deductible plan, they were trying to help offset the employees' costs.
There's only two questions I had.
And it could be that they were trying, you know, the council's trying to split the difference between, you know, trying to give the employees some more money to help, but not necessarily, you know, having, you know, trying to help them, those employees who need it, but maybe not trying to just have greater account values or something. So, because if the excess didn't carry over, then you'd have obviously more limited funds available.
Well, I'm in agreement that we don't need to have these three buckets. That seems like so unnecessary. Any specific reason why we want to go exactly from 25 to 4?
It was a compromise we made.
That was the compromise that we struck? Okay. I mean, that's almost, you know, it's not quite double, but it's quite an increase. I mean, to go from 25 to 4,000 as a cap.
Well, like I said, it's because
Right. I get it. You go in and have one scan done and you're already at your max.
correct.
I
yeah.
get that. So 2,500 probably in the climate, if you will, of medical stuff is like, yeah, that's,
Well, we thought that, like I said, if a family could get 1,000 per year, it's, you know, it'd be pretty miraculous if a family had no medical expenses in a 4-year span. So the fact that they would exceed $4,000 seems, you know, that they would not use that money for anything in 4 years seems kind of unlikely, but,
I'm okay with the change.
and just so you, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna second the motion. made by
Okay.
Can I have
Alderman
the,
McCleary.
so you don't want to do the 3 buckets?
No 3 buckets.
Are you
Allow
good
them,
with?
allow them to use all the unused funds to roll over to the max, which is now going to increase from 2,500 to 4,000.
And would it be the single plans get 500 a year and families get 1,000 like they do now?
Correct.
We're gonna double the contribution they get and eliminate the supplemental.
Perfect.
Is that what you're saying?
That's a better way to say it, yeah. And increase the max of the cap from 2,500 to 4,000 per employee.
Okay, so Scott made the motion, Tim, you second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Send it to council.
We will, and just as a supplemental, no pun intended, information on that, we have been revising the actual plan documents for the HRA, which will incorporate these changes you're talking about. We'll bring that to the next council meeting. Well,
It'll be ready.
it will be at an upcoming meeting.
I like that wording better.
And part of the reason you got the agenda a little bit later than we would have preferred is because we spent at least 3+ hours yesterday, Lacey, me, Corey, and Jesse, going line by line of the current plan and trying to modify it. So, but I just wanted to let you know that these will be, we're trying to update the entire, HRA plan and procedures, because the whole thing, it could use some updating, or so.
Okay.
Okay.
Turn.
I third.